We are honored today to have as our presenter one of Oregon's most accomplished native sons. Many of us know of parts of his background, but it is illuminating to read his entire resume, as I have had the chance to do in preparing for this luncheon. Let me just mention a few of his accomplishments, focusing on his academic, professional, and public service background. He's a graduate of Harvard College, magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa, has a BA and MA from Oxford University, which he attended as a Rhodes Scholar. He has a JD from Bolt Hall at the University of California in Berkeley, where he was a member of the Order of Coif and elected his graduating class speaker. While a professor at the University of Oregon Law School, he was elected 3 times to the Oregon House of Representatives. In 1980, he was elected Oregon's Attorney General, an office which he held for 11 years. While Attorney General, he served as president of the National Association of Attorneys General and was the recipient of a national award emblematic of the state attorney general who best exemplifies the goals of that office. He also personally argued 7 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, prevailing on 6 of the 7. After running as his party's candidate for governor of Oregon in 1990, he left the office of Attorney General to become the dean of the Oregon School of Law on January 1, 1992. Among other ongoing activities, our speaker serves as a member of the Oregon Progress Board, the state board nominated by the governor and approved by the Senate, which created and administers the Oregon Benchmarks program. Many of you are familiar with the Benchmarks. The Benchmarks program is Oregon's nationally acclaimed system of measuring outputs, how well we're doing as a state in all aspects of life. It's a set of goals that have been officially adopted by the legislature and are part of state law. Now, with this kind of background and credentials, it seems to me that this group should be interested in whatever this speaker has to say to us, all the more so given the important topic that he's going to address today. As part of the club's Oregon at Risk series, Dave Frohnmayer will address the challenges facing Oregon's educational system, focusing on the fact that we are in a situation where college, graduate, and postgraduate programs are being recognized as essential for the long-term economic well-being of our state, while at the same time unstable funding and downsizing of our educational institutions are threatening our very capacity to change. So I'm very pleased to give you Dave Frohnmayer, but as I do, I want you to join with me in giving him a quick, rousing birthday song salute, because July 9th is his birthday. So let's show the people in Eugene that we in Portland can actually sing. So you ready? Here we go. This is a birthday song to Dave. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dave. Happy birthday to you. Dave Frohnmayer.
Thank you, Jim. I can only say thank you to all of you, but somebody snitched me off, and that person will have to pay if I find him or her. But I do thank you for the largest chorus I think I've ever received in my life. Ladies and gentlemen, and loyal alumni of the University of Oregon School of Law, out of deference particularly to the presence of the last group and to avoid the controversy raging in California following its tragedy and controversy, I will avoid all lawyer jokes with which I usually begin my remarks. But I will begin with a story which many of you know is one with which I'm particularly fond from the legal profession, because it sets the stage, I think, for the remarks that will follow. And it's a story about what happened to Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most distinguished jurists in American history, Civil War hero, wounded 4 times, went on to be a scholar, and then served on the United States Supreme Court well into his 90s, and wrote some of the most distinguished opinions and important opinions on American civil rights ever to have been penned by anyone. And it's said that in his twilight years, Holmes found himself on a train, and the conductor came up and asked him for his ticket. But Holmes, with increasing irritation, reached in his pockets and couldn't find it. By that time, the conductor recognized the distinguished jurist, though, so he said, "Well, that's all right, Mr. Justice Holmes. You don't need to give me your ticket now. You can just mail it in when you get home." And Holmes looked back up at him with real irritation, and he said, "The problem is not where my ticket is. The problem is, where am I going?" And indeed, that is part of the burden as well as challenge of the Progress Board, but not limited to the Progress Board, to all of us in this room, all who are listening, all citizens of Oregon, to ask that question. Where is it that we are going, and how do we purport to get there? And to quote another, maybe more recent figure, perhaps apocryphally, Yogi Berra, if you don't know where you're going, when you get there, you'll be lost. Obviously, we hope that we can do better than that. Today, in this report card on education, especially higher education at risk, I want to explore 4 themes, which I hope will unify my presentation, as well as some demographic data that may be familiar to you, but should startle you nonetheless when it's repeated. The first theme is that we do think we know where we're going, but our aspirations differ profoundly from certain trends which are engulfing us. The trend of insecurity, which is measurable, which has been polled, which is established, both insecurity personally, insecurity financially, which is felt probably at a record temperature in Oregon today. The real wage loss that's characterized the Oregon workforce over the last dozen years as our economy has changed and shifted. The tribal politics that's engulfing us as we find ourselves fractionated in ever smaller groups defined whether by gender or caste or class or religion or region. The divisiveness of hot-button social issues and those who exploit them for money or power or glory. But we can predict, and this is the second point, with some precision what will happen if we fail to meet our aspirations. The third theme I'd like to strike is that we should be angry, alarmed, and mobilized by what it is that we already know and what it is that we can predict. And my fourth theme is that we, in fact, have reason to be optimistic, that the solutions to these problems are within our grasp, that, in fact, we should not be insecure and powerless, living as we do in one of the finest places to live on this great green planet. I'll take a few moments also throughout my talk to preview what Bill Wyatt may well be telling you about the Oregon Values Study, the largest study ever done of what it is that Oregonians hold in common. A study that's very reassuring in many respects because it dismisses stereotypes and shows that we have far more in common than the social critics amongst us and those who seek to divide us might believe. So I will take from Bill's material, but also from the material of others, bearing in mind that old academic admonition that if you take from one person, that's plagiarism. If you take from 2 or more sources, that's scholarship. The Values Study said this about Oregon, and this study, by the way, is of more than 1,000 people, demographically selected, the sample large enough that it encompasses the views of all congressional districts, all regions, all corners of Oregon. What comes out of that study says, first of all, is that Oregonians value education very highly. It is not an afterthought. It is central to our belief about what it is we are as a people, and is increasingly recognized as important for our future, to deal with the financial and personal insecurity that people see threatening their lives. Interestingly enough, and I have no way to speculate on the underlying causes of this, the newcomers amongst us Oregonians feel even more strongly about the value of education than do the old-timers, and women feel more strongly about it than do men. A second finding, people want change in education, especially at the primary and secondary level. Parents with kids in school want change in their schools and their neighborhood schools even more strongly than those who don't currently have children in school now. A third finding, perhaps not surprising in view of last Tuesday's elections, Oregonians are not yet ready to open the bank vault door to pay everything for which the educational sector asks. A fourth finding, people value higher education less than they value K through 12. But the ranking of higher education as an important value is still very high in the views of Oregonians. And for these purposes, a fifth and final finding of the Oregon Values Survey, people recognize that we live in a changing economy. And people who responded to that survey recognize that no longer will it be the typical experience that a student can walk out of a high school with a diploma and enter a family wage job. So I'd like to talk about education and those values in my own way, in service, I hope, of your examination of Oregon at Risk. I think personally, as a parent, as an educator, as a public servant, whatever hat I wear, that education is probably the best service that you can buy. It doesn't burn down, it doesn't depreciate, and no one can steal it. It's a key to personal liberation, as well as all of the other economic values, which I primarily will address later in my remarks. In that respect, I'd like to summarize the topics on which I'll now touch. First of all, that the Oregon economy is changing and changing rapidly, changing dramatically. And yet we who live amidst it may not be recognizing this other than the shock to the timber industry of the spotted owl controversy. Second, demand for education, especially higher education, is increasing. But third, access and the capacity to have access for Oregonians to higher education is falling. And the last point is that all the changes that are driving the importance of the need for education and graduate level education are only increasing. And I want to start with that point by recounting to you an event that occurred approximately 5 years ago in England. A very gifted analyst of our current educational and technocratic scene named Bill Daggett, who at that point held an educational office in the state of New York, gave an extemporaneous speech for 45 minutes to a group of people who were concerned about advanced technologies. He spoke off the cuff from just a few notes. 90 seconds after Mr. Daggett had finished his speech, he was followed by another speaker, a former high official of IBM who now headed this Institute for Advanced Technology, saying, "I'll bet a lot of you really wanted a permanent record of what Bill Daggett said. Here it is." And he gave them a complete typewritten, word-perfect, spell-checked copy of that speech, transcribed through voice technology. Not only gave it in English, but in 4 different languages. That speaks to a technology that, of course, is not online now, but knowing what happened to the personal computer revolution is only a few years away. Now think, if you will, for a moment, what that says to our existing and prospective secretarial and clerical workforce. It says you won't have a job any place that this is online, because people can look directly on their screens and talk directly into their telephones and see their own words printed on that screen. Where are those family wage jobs going to be without a real capacity to think through the need for continuing lifelong training and technological expertise? This is a global phenomenon. We're already there. Many of the Fortune 500 companies are already having their clerical work done offshore through fiber optics by people trained in more advanced keyboard technologies who can do the work faster and cheaper offshore in Taiwan or China and twix it back rather than employ people here. The pace of technological change is so rapid that there was more change in the world between the years 1985 and 87 than there was in the entire 140 years of the Industrial Revolution. 70% of the jobs at which our children will work have not even been thought of yet. And of course, that was true the few years ago I was born, because of all the job categories that existed in 1940, 70% of them have changed in that intervening period. That will only increase. It is projected that our children and their grandchildren will change jobs, occupations, or professions a minimum of 4 or 5 times during the course of their lives, speaking volumes about the nature and capacity of learning how to learn that they have to be given by our educational institutions. 44% of our jobs right now are in major part involved with the collection, synthesis, or retrieval of information. The hard labor categories are giving way to the economy of the mind. It's predictable, it's demonstrable, and it's only going to increase. The service sector is automating. In 1983, 7% of the paid working hours were working hours at the keyboard. That figure by 1995 will be 25%, an increase of almost 3.5 times in the space of just a little bit more than a decade. A child who graduates from our school system without keyboarding skills, with apologies to Jurassic Park, will be given the equivalent of a dinosaur's sheepskin. That's the kind of skills that we have to have. But will there be those low-wage jobs that kids count on now? Not if you believe the futurists that I've talked to and read about. Robotics is going to take over fast foods, as will laser cooking. You'll stick your automatic teller machine card in and the burger will come out, and there won't be any of those cute kids with the white hats ready to wait on you and give you your burger and fries. And the same is happening with manufacturing jobs as well. I was recently told by a person who toured one of this region's biggest lumber mills that a seasoned person who'd been on the green chain a very long time, when asked who was the single most valuable person in that mill, said the computer operator. Services don't have to be low wage. They, in fact, can be high wage. But they are the services that require an enormous educational component. 1 out of 5 Oregon small businesses, in fact, is a high wage or high salary, relatively speaking, job in the services sector, whether it's agriculture, medicine, engineering, architecture, health care, data processing, law, or the like. The professional technical field is not only expanding, it's exploding. One of the hidden secrets about the changes in the Oregon economy. At the Key Industries Summit held here in Oregon last March, many observers, in fact, I think virtually all, were startled by the unanimity of the response of representatives of all 11 major industries represented there in their insistence that higher education and a strong higher education community in Oregon was absolutely essential to the economic well-being of the industries on which all of us Oregonians depend. It is, in fact, a magnet for the growth and thriving of our industrial base in the state of Oregon. And interestingly enough, that same call was echoed by industries not thought traditionally to be dependent upon high technology or the knowledge industries. But in fact, agriculture, fisheries, and forestry all echoed that same view. They needed to have the assistance of the minds in higher education to assist them. Well, what's been our response to this? Our official response in the benchmarks adopted by the Oregon Progress Board that are freely available to you, and I hope which you're at least somewhat knowledgeable about, as well as the goal of the Oregon Education Reform Act, or the so-called Katz bill, is by the year 2000 to have the best trained workforce in the United States, and by the year 2010 to have demonstrably the best workforce in the world. That's what our aspiration is, officially stated, to the extent that that matters. Maybe what matters more is what Oregonians believe. So let me segue back now to the Oregon Values Survey. It in fact reinforces the education benchmarks and the priority that's placed on education. We know it. 66%, 2/3 of Oregonians surveyed believed that wages for those with only a high school education would actually drop over the next 10 years. No secrets out there. This is well known and well appreciated and probably fuels the insecurity which is disrupting our political system right now. 60% believe that Oregon businesses will be producing more advanced products and more valuable services that will rely upon high levels of education and skill. 50%, half of the respondents, believe that Oregon is doing a bad job of providing the skills that are necessary to compete in a global economy. In other words, putting my own editorial gloss on this, in a substantial way, we Oregonians appreciate the admonition of H.G. Wells that civilization is in a race between education and catastrophe. So what's the reality that we have to address? Recognizing an existing statistic that a person who possesses a college or university degree will, on the average, earn $1,000 a month more each month of a lifetime than a person who does not possess that degree. A very reliable indicator of where the family wage jobs need to be. Well, reality is that we're going in exactly the wrong direction. In the months since Measure 5 has passed, 70 programs throughout the institutions of higher education have been cut. And yet, by the year 2000, there will be a 40% increase in the number of high school students who will want a college education. That's the baby boom echo. It's predictable. We know it. That's not books that are cooked by some speaker invited for a Friday afternoon. They're already in junior high school. We know that they're coming, and there isn't going to be a place for a bunch of them. And let me tell you how many there won't be a place for. There won't be a place for those who depend upon low tuition, because in order to make up for budgetary shortfalls, Tuition in state system schools has gone up an average across those schools by 58% between the years 1990 and 1994. Higher education's share of the general fund in the last 5 years has fallen from 17% to 10%. In any survey that you look at, but the most recent one was the most alarming. I was told just a few days ago that if current trends continue, by the year 2001, 1 out of 2 Oregon high school graduates will not be able to go to a public or private or community college in the state of Oregon. What a statement. What are we doing? Well, other people just across a river that's just a couple miles north of here are doing something very different. They're spending $100 million to build a Washington State University campus in Vancouver, with no guarantees that there will be a tuition waiver, of course, for students who choose to cross the river. I was told by a Republican legislator from the state of Washington just a few weeks ago that this is very deliberate, and that 6 or 8 years ago, the Republican caucus sat down in the Senate and said, we see education tied inextricably to the economic development of the state of Washington. We need a long-term plan to build it so that we will have the capacity to deal with the changing global economy and our state's future. And they made a pact on which, even in tough times, they have by and large delivered. So something besides a river separates our political cultures. But it certainly tells us that a state that does not have per capita wealth significantly different than ours has made significantly different decisions when facing these realities. It has not chosen, as we threaten to do, to embrace the notion of unilateral disarmament of our capacity to face the future, which is, in my view, a personal one, but one I hope that you share in the most profound way, of where we are going if we do not attend to the economy of the future, the knowledge economy, the economy of the mind that is so essential. I talked just 2 days ago to a person in Salem long known for his advocacy of K through 12, and I take nothing away, being a father of 2 kids in grade school, from the need to have a strong primary and secondary system, and I'll return to that point in a moment. But what he said, notwithstanding his advocacy, is, you know, higher education has it even tougher than we in K through 12 because your professors will go away and move away, and your reputation will be destroyed for a generation, and you just can't build that back with quick substitutions. And that's the difference he saw in the catastrophes facing both of those sectors of higher education. At the Education Summit held recently, it can best be summarized and was by Bill Graves in the Oregonian as follows. A litany of concerns about schools losing electives, sports, activities, and teachers, the exodus of brightest kids to other state colleges in other regions of the country, the potential that the state will lose new businesses that might otherwise come here because of the magnet capacity of a strong and vibrant higher education system, top students going elsewhere, and the stark fact that because of that brain drain, and this prediction is solid also, businesses in the year 2001 will be importing 2 workers for every Oregonian that they hire because of the changing nature of the employment patterns in this state. That's just 8 years away, my friends. What we're doing then in education is not investment, it is affirmative disinvestment. Larry Wolf from OIT, a very thoughtful person, picking up on the title of a recent popular bestseller, explored this inventively in an essay called The 13th Generation, which is now what the generation is in schools based upon when we started in this country. And basically, the message that we are sending to those kids, I hope we're not sending, but it's almost inescapable to think otherwise, is a flashing neon sign saying a bunch of different messages, but there's something like this. No vacancy, no hope, we don't need you, we don't care, I got mine, we'll think about it later. And yet, you know, I refuse to be a person who succumbs to pessimism in view of all of this. And I'll return again to the Oregon Business Council's values survey. Because when asked if there's any one thing that you could fix, Oregonians selected 3 things as their top priorities. The economy, 19%, education, 11%, and taxes, 13%. And the trick that we have which isn't difficult as a matter of logic and truth, is to show that all of those three things, stable taxes, an effective education system, and a strong economy, are inextricably wedded to each other. Let me summarize then where I think we are. We need to go forward from this orgy of disinvestment to benchmarks that we can reach. The Oregon Progress Board measured where we were in terms of Oregonians going to Oregon schools. We were at 19%. We said we want to be at least 25% by 1995 or 99. In fact, we're down to 12%. Second, and this is a matter of self-criticism, I don't think that we have developed as strongly as we can, and I say we, both the Progress Board and the higher education community, a statement of the outcomes that we really want and need from our higher education system. And while I've spoken in economic terms this afternoon, I could just as easily have spoken in terms of personal worth, personal liberation, greater knowledge, better citizenship, and I'm sure you recognize those arguments. But they're not stated in our benchmarks, and until they are, we lose some capacity to articulate in a simple message, in a gripping message, why it is that this topic is so critical for Oregon's future. What I've said this afternoon is not a critique, but in fact a reinforcement of the Education Reform Act that was passed by the Oregon legislature and which is now being implemented by the board and the superintendent of public instruction. But I add some caveats. It's an endorsement only if we fund what is necessary to change that's mandated by that measure. Only if we recognize the need for a post-secondary, indeed a lifelong learning component, in addition to the K through 12 or K through 14 components of the certificates that we award. Third, if we don't do some sort of premature two-tracking of students, one of the persistent concerns about the measure that I hope that we can avoid. And finally, only if the standards for education actually go up, as that bill promises that they will, as indeed they must. And in fact, if they do, it's my view, it's the view of Norma Paulus, that we can save millions that are now being squandered on remedial education at every step of our educational process, including our professional schools, because our early childhood education has been lacking in all quarters. So indeed, it is a reinforcement and a statement of reinforcement of the importance to have a solid and seamless educational continuum rather than have each of the sectors battling for the last precious general fund dollar. I think we Oregonians know that we don't want to be a third world colony or a domestic variant thereof, and it's my hope that we get a sense of passion and urgency about the need to avoid that outcome, which is, in my view, and from the data I've attempted to share with you in these brief moments, inescapable unless we attend to the urgency of the task that we had. And that, of course, brings up the subject that I'm sure sparked the development of this speaker series, and that is the issue of Measure 5 and tax stability. You see, you can have a system that still looks pretty good from the outside, just as you can have what might even be a luxury car going down the highway at 60 miles an hour. But if it doesn't have any oil in the engine, sooner or later that engine block will freeze. And then it still may look very good from the outside, but it won't run. And that's the insidious nature of the inexorable march of the Measure 5 countdown if we do not have substitute revenue for those services that are so essential to us. And so I applaud the efforts that are going on in Salem. They're difficult. They are controversial. People want bells or whistles or different kinds of tax schemes, and I don't come here today proposing a perfect one to you because, as the old saw says, the only perfect tax system is one where somebody else pays the taxes. But clearly we need to encourage our legislators and applaud them if they give us a revenue package to vote on. And if by chance that were to fail, I think we need to do it again and again and again until we fine-tune something that will save us, and if we want to forget ourselves, our children and their children, from a catastrophe that could engulf them. I think also we need a social contract of the same kind as the state of Washington. Not the biennial rush for budgets, only to go home again and start building a new budget, but a long-term plan for how it is that all of our institutions, public and private, community college to postgraduate, are in fact going to meet the need for the highly technical and professional and important education that the 21st century global economy demands. I think also we need to rise to the challenge of thinking big. You know, much of it is self-concept. An interesting poll was done by a journalism professor at the University of Oregon who found that Oregonians who believed certain things didn't believe that their neighbors shared those beliefs. So we tend to be systematically more pessimistic about what we will do as a body than what we ourselves individually are willing and able to do. So in a curious way, and in a way that I can't begin to know how to inspire, we need to dream bigger dreams. Our sacred cows have had very big pastures. It's now time for our sacred dreams to have space of their own. Because you see, this is the place where people will come. To take a line from that wonderful movie, if we build it, they will come. We have the capacity in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, the great Northwest Quarter, to have one of the truly splendid capacities to live and enjoy life to its fullest with our families, while still having world-class jobs to employ our people to put bread on the table and to solve our social ills. That's possible. I don't know an economist who denies that possibility. So I urge you to share that as part of our shared vision together. I'd ask you to do one thing today. You've given me the pleasure of sharing my thoughts with you, and I'd like to repay the courtesy. If you have thoughts on these subjects that you want shared with the Progress Board, I urge you to write me, and I promise you I will read every letter, because this isn't something for people walking down a road to Damascus or a single leader on a white horse to say, follow me. This is something that we share together. It's a critical mission. I'm reminded of the wonderful allegory that is said to have come from Chinese mythology about a young person after adolescence who went to a wise old elder. The story was this: "O wise elder, I wrote my name in the sand, but the tides came and the water washed my name away. What'll become of me? O wise elder, I wrote my name in the bark of a tree, but the tree grew and the bark grew over and my name went away. What's the meaning of life? Wise elder, I climbed a mountain and I chiseled my name in stone on the granite at the top, but the winds came and the water froze and the dust blew and the sand came and my name was erased. What is the meaning of life? What is it that I am to do?" And the elder said to the youngster, "Write your name, inscribe your name in the hearts of children, and you will live, and you will endure forever and ever and ever." Ladies and gentlemen, that is our task. To write and inscribe in the futures of our children and theirs to follow them. That ought to be, in the sense of profound trusteeship, our highest and most noble calling. Let's join together and do it. Thank you.
Our first question to be asked by Ann Jarvis, followed by Diana Smiley.
Thank you for your remarks. You mentioned in your remarks that if current trends continue, Oregon will be able to serve the higher education needs of a smaller percentage of high school graduates who wish to pursue higher education. Could you comment on this and discuss how we might better inform the public and about the importance of higher education and its effects on the long-term economic goals of Oregon?
Well, it is true, and I'll repeat the statement. If current trends continue, either the downsizing, I call it capsizing, or even the stabilizing of existing capacity, faced with a 40% projected increase of high school graduates by the year 1999, there isn't any place in Oregon for them. Already, because of doubts, and I think many of them misconceived about the quality of education that kids receive here, because I believe it's outstanding. Many of our students, according to recent news stories, are going to neighboring states for their education, but we're seeing an increasing example of trends to increase out-of-state tuition and write regulations in such a way that people can't receive residency status in that foreign state, which means, of course, a tremendous economic debt burden with which they will graduate from college or university. See, I think, based upon the Oregon Values Survey and my own intuition and much data that I've seen, that Oregonians realize increasingly that there is a connection between how they and their children will live and what it is that we can offer as an educational system. What I think is lacking is the sense of security that we can really make a difference, that we can change it, that we can move from paralysis to action, and that a major piece of that action sooner rather than later is tax reform, so that we don't continually to shoot at an unseen enemy through our own heads. And I think that that process of change is occurring, but I expect it will only occur in the context of a dialogue about a concrete plan that really promises something it can deliver. We have to be able to show a product that matters. It's the customer service ethic. It ought to be one that we honor.
Good afternoon. In terms of the work of the Oregon Progress Board and the benchmarks for 1993 even, our Education Committee has been examining them and finds a particular lack of benchmarks relating to higher education results. And we'd like for you to comment, if you would, particularly as the benchmarks are being used to measure results by the legislature and for funding purposes at times. Could you comment on that seeming lack of specificity to higher education?
Well, I agree completely with your conclusion and your observation, and so does the Progress Board. At our most recent several meetings, we have agreed, and particularly following the Key Industries Summit, when the higher education applause was sounded so strongly, that we need a better way of saying what it is are the outcomes that we really expect from higher education, because otherwise it's amorphous in the public mind, and we bear some responsibility for that, and I say that as an educator. I'll read you one of the few post-secondary benchmarks that appears in this document of some 230 different benchmarks on post-secondary educational performance. And item number 28 is percentage of students, graduates, and employers who are satisfied with their experience with higher education. Well, first of all, those all ought to be disaggregated so that you have it for each. And then I'm not sure what we're supposed to learn with that. I mean, you may find that your education helped you 10 years out in ways that were totally unexpected by you. So it's a very primitive measure and embarrassing for me to have read, but I do that in the spirit of genuine self-criticism. Another one that appears, and maybe surprisingly, the number of Oregonians whom we want to have completed a baccalaureate degree by the year 2010 is 30%. I think that's very modest. Now, a baccalaureate degree by then may well look very differently than the one now. Our notion of what constitutes post-high school education may and indeed must change because it really will be a lifelong learning experience, I believe. But clearly that's a very modest goal. It's very incomplete. It is on the agenda of the August meeting of the Progress Board to address, so your question is very timely, and thank you for confirming my own observation. It will give me some credibility on the board, too, by the way. I appreciate it.
Just make a quick comment. We'll now open questions to anybody else from the floor. I encourage you to come to the mic. Please remember that they end in a question mark.
What?
If I remember to end it with an exclamation point on the answer. Okay.
Andrew Wheeler. In the knowledge economy, I think we, probably like the Japanese, are going to be offshoring our manufacturing kind of labor. But from what you described, maybe Oregon would be the site for manufacturing.
Well, not only the manufacturing, because people like to live here and want to live here. Oregon is only suitable for certain kinds of manufacturing. But I made another point. I mean, I agree with the first point. I'll make a second point. And that is that of the sectors of the Oregon economy that grew the most rapidly during the 80s, it was the services sector. And we need to be very careful when we have someone throw that notion at us, because you typically think of the services sector as being low-wage jobs, heavy physical jobs, but that's not altogether true. It's kind of an hourglass sort of configuration, because the top of the hourglass is all of the high value added professional, knowledge-based, information-based activities that don't have any seemingly better classification. That's one point. The final point is, of course, that there won't be any industry, manufacturing or not, that is not high-tech by the year 2000. And in fact, that's largely true right now. So we need to separate out the notion that somehow the extraction industries will be following a different track. I mean, I've been through lumber mills that would blow you away in terms of the sophisticated computer capability of fine tolerances that they can engage in simply because of the kind of automation which they've imported. Question here.
Dan Goldie, member. As a former director of economic development, I agree completely, and we followed the idea that you expounded here, that higher education, good higher education, is the key to a diversified economy. My question is this: given what the president has just come out with by way of a program to deal with the forests of this area, the forest resources, and the prospect that the counties will lose something like $270 million a year that they've been getting in revenues, and that some 52,000 workers directly employed in wood products are jobs at risk. How do we get there? I mean, this is an added thunderstorm on top of the rain on the picnic. And how do we get then to improved higher education at a time when the state is facing something of a catastrophe in terms of its revenues and its economy?
Yeah. Well, Dan, you put the dilemma very well, because, and you're far better qualified as an economist than I to answer that question. It is a hit. It's a big hit. I think that the projection of the Clinton administration was that this would be an administrative solution to the issue. I think that when that administration came up to terms with the laws that are on the books, they found far less flexibility than they thought that they would find when they held the Forest Summit out here. And my prediction, and I don't like to make this prediction, and believe me, I'm one of those lawyers who believes that many problems ought not to be solved in court rather than sent there. If I offend my colleagues, so be it. But I think they would agree with me too. I don't see how it's going to avoid continued protracted litigation, and therefore, at least for some parts of the I-5 corridor, and certainly the timber-dependent communities, it will be a continuing problem for a number of years.
Eva Parsons, would you comment, please, on what you see the solution being to the apparent turf battles among the various institutions of higher education in this state?
Yeah, you know, I'm encouraged to report to you that I see fewer turf battles than I saw a dozen years ago when I was in higher education the first time. I guess I'm the Rip Van Winkle of the higher education system, having been in it for a decade, been its lawyer for 11 years, and then come back to it. I have seen an enormous willingness of institutions to collaborate, to put together joint programs such as the joint MBA program, the joint engineering program. The State Board of Higher Education and the Chancellor have done a very skillful behind-the-scenes job of putting together and mobilizing resources amongst the various 8 institutions to work together far more effectively than would have been the case a dozen years ago. So I think the trend is in the right direction, and maybe more pronounced than is generally recognized, because if there's one rap that makes it difficult to get educational reform or adequate funding, it's the persistent charge of duplication. And I see far less duplication than was true 12 years ago, and I think the accusation of duplication is far overstated in any event.
Charlie Davis, member. I want to ask a question that could not possibly be interpreted as a comment. I wonder if it's occurred to you that you're wasting your time this afternoon. You should have stayed in Eugene and accomplished something, because this body is so hobbled by its self-imposed perception of the 501c3 that even though we had an excellent report on tax reform, we're not a player at the table. The tax reform is being worked out in Salem by persons probably much less qualified than the people in this club. So I posed my question to you, whether or not it might be better for you not to talk to the City Club in the future, knowing that your talk will just be recorded and put on the shelf. Well,
you've zinged a lot of people with that, Charlie, and I'm not. I I want to keep some intellectual, emotional, and physical distance from you as we leave this afternoon. In fact, you should be heartened to know that the City Club's report on tax reform does grace the offices and desks of legislators in Salem. I've seen it there, physically, personally. It's been talked of. Second, whether I've wasted my time, well, at least I have the radio audience, which I hope has enjoyed. And I did get a very nice happy birthday, so I thank you for that.
Bob Whelan. I hate to follow Charlie always.
I don't blame you. I'm sorry.
Would you say that the passage of Measure 5, the failure of the recent school levies, and the passage of hatred and bigotry measures around the state indicate a failure of our educational system?
Not precisely, no. We live in a state, a society, and a world that has gone through a period of profound shock because of all of these trends that I've talked about. And one of the things that fuels actions that we might regard as irrational or hateful is insecurity. And Oregonians do not feel secure. And that causes an enormous disenchantment from all of our institutions. It explains in some part the parole vote, explains the emergence of splinter parties and this vicious give no quarter, take no prisoners kind of new tribalism that I've talked about and written about in other quarters. But I don't think that means that we as a society don't hold fundamental values. One of the things that Bill Wyatt will tell you next week, I suspect, is that people were asked about their feelings about Oregon. And there's an enormous sense of allegiance to placeness, words not of affection, but of love for Oregon. It's beautiful here. I love it here. I care about it. The single thing that Oregon people value even more than their occupation and profession is spending time with their loved ones, with their families. It's an elevated, really innovating notion of family values. That's what Oregonians care about. They care deeply about education. So the catalyst for change, the catalyst for reform, the catalyst for action, I'm convinced, is there. What yet is missing is the sense that we can do it, the sense of dreaming big enough dreams. And that's, whether I wasted my time coming here, as Charlie may think, what I would urge us to do.
Walt Roberts, City Club member. Dave, thanks very much for your words and presenting what you've presented here today. I personally appreciate it very much. My question has to do with our dreams as a community, as a state, and the Oregon Progress Board. It seems that we share some values and share some very strong emotions or feelings about our state and our family and our jobs. And we have the beginnings of an articulated vision. And my question is what opportunities and challenges are there for the Oregon Progress Board in its potential role as kind of a vehicle or a place where that collective vision can get translated into action through our political mechanism, through our community volunteer, through all aspects of turning vision into reality. So again, the Oregon Progress Board, what role can it play? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities there?
Well, I think the most dangerous and disappointing thing we could do is delegate to a group of 7 or 9 people the task of dreaming great dreams, or assuming that because they're doing that job, it's not within our capacity or not part of our collective job to dream great dreams about this state. So please don't call it Dreams Incorporated and say somebody else has got the assignment. It's yours. The second thing is something that's actually happening that's very positive and almost spontaneous. And that is many communities and regions around the state are saying, well, these benchmarks don't fit us all perfectly because geographically our region is smaller and we have different problems, but we're going to sit down and put together a group of, across disciplinary lines, across governmental jurisdiction lines, and we're going to decide what Deschutes County is going to be. They're doing that in Bend right now. In Eugene, I'm part of a group. I was invited to become part of a group to see if we couldn't articulate something for Lane County. It's happening in the greater Portland area also. So the ripple effect of the notion that maybe if you start looking at outcomes that you want rather than the inputs that you pay for, that's beginning to have an impact in terms of how people are behaving in other areas. And finally, of course, I think the Progress Board can be, and we are planning to be, a forum as we make various regional visits for not only this opportunity, but for the opportunity for people to comment on these 212 or 230 or so ideas that have been generated by the efforts of thousands of people, and say, do you buy into this dream? You know, it is the rare society that over the space of a generation has had the capacity to stay to a single vision. But those are the great societies in the history of civilization.
Hi, I'm Barbara Clark. I was wondering, I sort of sense a discontinuity in your remarks because you talk about how technology is streamlining so many different tasks, and yet you haven't said how it's going to streamline productivity in higher education. Couldn't they get a lot more done with the same workforce?
That's an argument that's always made. It's an issue that is not only being explored but being implemented because the governor's budget and the legislature's funding will require more outputs by the same number or fewer faculty. And I suppose the question is, what does one consider as productivity? And let me take the liberty, if I may, of sharing a personal story. Many of you know that there's a horrific disease that affects my daughters and has claimed one of them. Happily, that problem is being addressed by a person who's employed by a university but doesn't teach in a classroom. But he found the gene, he and his co-researchers. And it's going to revolutionize medicine. It may even affect in fundamental ways the understanding of leukemia and cancer. Now, is that person not productive because he doesn't have 10 people in a classroom every hour on the hour? See, there's something to be said for the broad mission of the advancement of knowledge itself as an important part of the mission of higher education. It's always suspect. It has been part of the debate as long as I've been a member of the academy or even a student in it. But I think we need to be careful about what it is that we're attacking, lest we be shooting at the wrong enemy.
Well, the reason I ask is that there's a lot of technology on how learning takes place, you know, how it can be helped or hindered, and yet you don't see this applied in the college classrooms. You see it a lot better in the K through 12 classroom.
That may be, but it's certainly not been my experience in my limited time of return when I see people not only teaching classes by email, which one of the professors does in my own academic unit, but people who prepare computer exercises so that the students can not only learn their keyboard and typing skills, but at the same time they're solving mind problems. The internet, how many of you here know about the internet or know what the internet is? Okay, well this is a well-informed audience. But that's an international pathway of these electronic geniuses who put together all kinds of ways to access databases and each other from around the world. I just heard from a professor in South Africa from his laptop computer a couple of days ago. And so these technologies, I think, in fact, are being adapted as rapidly as the resources, and they do cost, regrettably, are available to do them.
Ray Polanyi, a City Club member. Mr. Frohnmayer, I think the crucial question really is employment, creating enough employment. And I guess if we listen to the last meetings of the G7, it seems to be a common problem. Most of the developed world has problems creating enough employment. And so much as I would like to be as optimistic as you are, I'm wondering how all these high tech and all these things are going to provide enough employment for most people. Certainly higher education is very important, but how many can be higher educated, and what about all the others? You know, it's very difficult to have half free and half slave and be happy. So what do you see for the vast majority of the people that maybe cannot or will not or will have no access to higher education? What kind of employment is there going to be for them?
I think that's the $64,000 question. You described my dream. I described my dream. You described my nightmare. But happily, we don't have to answer that question today because I can't. It does suggest to your program committee a wonderful topic for people who are qualified to begin to address it, and I hope that you do. It's wonderful to have a dean's portfolio because you can shoot your mouth off about anything, but that's not where I stand any expertise.
This will have to be our last question.
Barbara Lombardo. I'm puzzled by the dissonance or even contradiction between the results of the values survey that show that Oregonians value education so highly, and then the reality of what we see happening to its budget, both in higher education and K through 12. And I wonder how you explain that dissonance.
I think it's the insidious nature of Measure 5 because the way it operates, the way it was designed, makes it very difficult to connect the source of the pain with the identification of the cure. And that's because its full effect is disguised at least for another biennium, at which point the engine really does freeze up in 95, 97 biennium if nothing is done. But that's the perception problem, and it creates an insidious kind of perception problem that we're still trying to deal with, that the legislature is trying to wrestle with, and doing so, I think, in good faith and under enormously trying circumstances. But the other part of it is maybe we haven't made the sale. I mean, we give all the statistics, we don't give the bottom line. I mean, what are the 7 words, as the advertising people would ask you, that will make you want to buy at that store? What are the 7 words or the 5 words or the Pepsi Light slogan that will make you say, yeah, it's really important, education is really important, and it's really important that we pay enough for it that our kids won't be in that unemployed second caste that might be created by the emerging economy. Thank you very much.
Our great appreciation to Dave Frohnmayer for joining us today and his insightful remarks. Seems appropriate I acknowledge that Ray Polani did not ask a transportation-related question. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.